It was a brisk evening in late November when the local police received a frantic 911 call. The voice on the other end trembled with panic, describing a violent confrontation that had escalated into something far worse. The location was an unassuming two-story house on Willow Lane. Inside, officers discovered a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. Blood spattered the living room walls, furniture overturned in a desperate struggle. The victim, a young man in his late 20s, lay lifeless on the floor, a single stab wound to the chest marking the violent end of his life. But this was no random act of violence. The ties that bound the victim to the perpetrator were as tangled as the lives that unraveled in its wake. At the center of the tragedy was a love triangle so forbidden, so fraught with tension, that it seemed destined to end in catastrophe. A fiancée torn between loyalty to her future husband and lingering passion for her ex's brother, an affair that sparked jealousy, betrayal, and, ultimately, murder. As the events unfolded, the question on everyone's mind was, how could a seemingly ordinary love story take such a deadly turn? To answer that, we must start at the beginning, Maplewood. A suburb town with tree-lined streets and neatly trimmed lawns was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other warmly and gossip spread faster than the morning news. It was the type of community where secrets were hard to keep, and everyone knew everyone. Or so they thought. In the heart of this seemingly idyllic town lived Nathan Carter, a 29-year-old real estate agent known for his ambition and charm. Nathan was the kind of person who could close a deal with a smile and leave clients feeling like they'd made a lifelong friend. He was engaged to Emily Donovan, a 27-year-old graphic designer whose creativity and kind-hearted nature made her a beloved figure in her social circles. The two appeared to be the perfect couple, poised to build a future filled with love, success, and happiness. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly picture-perfect life lay a web of hidden emotions and unresolved connections. Before Nathan, Emily had been in a serious relationship with his older brother, Jacob Carter. Jacob, a charismatic but troubled figure, had left town years earlier after a series of personal setbacks, including a painful breakup with Emily. His departure seemed to have closed that chapter, allowing Emily and Nathan's relationship to flourish. But as Jacob unexpectedly returned to Maplewood, old feelings were reignited, and tensions within the Carter family began to simmer. Jacob's return was anything but subtle. He had always been the rebellious, enigmatic sibling, drawing people in with his rugged charm and unpredictable nature. For Emily, his reappearance brought back memories she thought she had buried. For Nathan, it was a reminder of the sibling rivalry that had defined much of their childhood. The dynamic between the three became increasingly strained as whispers of Jacob and Emily's lingering connection reached the edges of Maplewood's gossip mill. To those on the outside, it was a story of rekindled relationships and unresolved emotions. But for the people involved, it was a storm brewing just beneath the surface, one that would soon explode in a way no one could have predicted. It was a crisp November evening when the tension that had been simmering for weeks finally boiled over. Nathan Carter and Emily Donovan were at home preparing for what was supposed to be a quiet night. The cozy atmosphere of their two-story house on Willow Lane offered no hint of the chaos that was about to erupt. Earlier that day, Nathan had confronted Emily about her increasingly frequent interactions with Jacob. What began as a tense conversation had escalated into a heated argument. Accusations flew, and the fragile trust that had once held their relationship together began to crack. Emily, visibly distressed, insisted that her intentions were innocent, but Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from him. Around 8:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. Nathan answered, and there stood Jacob, his face a mixture of defiance and unease. What prompted him to show up unannounced that night remains unclear. Perhaps a desire to clear the air, or to stake his claim on emotions he had no right to reignite. But one thing was certain. Jacob's presence was like a match thrown into a powder keg. Nathan immediately bristled at the sight of his older brother. Words were exchanged, sharp and biting, as the siblings clashed in the doorway. Emily tried to intervene, pleading for calm, but her voice was drowned out by the growing intensity of their argument. As the shouting grew louder, neighbors later reported hearing raised voices, though none suspected the tragic turn the confrontation would take. At some point, the verbal sparring gave way to physical aggression. Nathan shoved Jacob, who stumbled backward but quickly regained his footing. Fueled by anger and years of unresolved resentment, Jacob retaliated, pushing Nathan into the living room. The two brothers grappled, their fight spilling over furniture and leaving the room in disarray. It was in the heat of this chaotic struggle that the unthinkable happened. Jacob grabbed a kitchen knife from a nearby counter, perhaps in a moment of desperation or blind fury. In a single, swift motion, he plunged the blade into Nathan's chest. The force of the blow sent Nathan collapsing to the floor, clutching at the wound as blood pooled around him. Emily screamed, her voice echoing through the house as she rushed to Nathan's side, but it was too late. Within moments, he was gone. Jacob, seemingly stunned by his own actions, dropped the knife and stood frozen, staring at his brother's lifeless body. The gravity of what he had done appeared to hit him all at once. Emily, still in shock, dialed 911 with trembling hands, barely able to relay the events to the dispatcher. When the police arrived minutes later, they found a scene of utter devastation. Nathan's body lay in the middle of the living room, the knife still nearby. Jacob was taken into custody without resistance, his hands still smeared with blood. Emily, hysterical and inconsolable, provided officers with a fragmented account of the events leading up to the deadly confrontation. The neighborhood buzzed with speculation as news of the crime spread. What could have driven two brothers to such a violent end? And what role did Emily's connection to both of them play in the tragedy? These questions lingered in the minds of investigators and the community alike, setting the stage for a case that would reveal layers of betrayal, jealousy, and heartbreak. The investigation into Nathan Carter's murder began immediately, with law enforcement determined to untangle the complex web of relationships and motives that led to the deadly confrontation. Led by Detective Sarah Coleman, a seasoned investigator known for her meticulous approach, the team started by piecing together the events of that fateful evening. The crime scene at the Carter residence was processed with painstaking detail. Blood spatter patterns, the position of Nathan's body, and the proximity of the knife all pointed to a violent altercation. Forensics confirmed that the knife recovered from the scene was the murder weapon. Jacob Carter's fingerprints were found on the handle, leaving no doubt about who had wielded it. Emily Donovan was brought in for questioning shortly after the crime. Still shaken, she provided a disjointed account of the events, emphasizing that the fight between Nathan and Jacob had escalated rapidly. She insisted that Jacob's actions were impulsive, driven by the heat of the moment rather than premeditation. Detectives noted her emotional state but remained skeptical of her full transparency. The investigation quickly turned to building a timeline of events leading up to the crime. Phone records revealed a pattern of communication between Emily and Jacob in the weeks prior. Text messages, though not overtly incriminating, hinted at a rekindling of their bond. Investigators also discovered that Jacob had been spending time near the Carter residence, raising suspicions about his intentions. Interviews with friends and neighbors painted a picture of growing tension. One neighbor reported hearing loud arguments from the house in the days before the murder. Another mentioned seeing Jacob outside the home on multiple occasions, sometimes lingering for hours. These accounts added weight to the theory that the conflict had been brewing for some time. Detective Coleman's team also dug into Jacob's background, uncovering a history of volatile behavior. Records showed previous altercations with Nathan, some dating back to their teenage years. While none had escalated to violence, they revealed a pattern of rivalry and unresolved resentment. Forensics on the knife revealed something unexpected. Traces of Jacob's DNA mixed with Nathan's blood. This discovery suggested that Jacob may have injured himself during the struggle, an indication of just how chaotic the altercation had been. This detail was pivotal in reconstructing the sequence of events. Meanwhile, a search of Jacob's belongings uncovered a handwritten note in his car. Though incomplete, it expressed feelings of guilt and frustration, referencing Emily and Nathan without naming them directly. Investigators debated whether this note indicated premeditation or merely reflected Jacob's state of mind in the aftermath. As the investigation progressed, Emily's role in the tragedy came under increasing scrutiny. Detectives questioned whether her continued interactions with Jacob had exacerbated the tensions between the brothers. While there was no evidence to suggest she intended for violence to occur, her decisions were seen as a catalyst for the conflict. Friends of Emily revealed that she had expressed confusion about her feelings toward Jacob. One friend recounted Emily admitting that Jacob's return had stirred emotions she thought were long buried. This revelation added another layer of complexity, raising questions about whether her actions were entirely innocent. Jacob Carter, now in custody, offered his version of events during a lengthy interrogation. He admitted to showing up at the house uninvited, but claimed he only wanted to talk. He described the confrontation as an emotional explosion, one fueled by years of tension and jealousy. According to Jacob, he never intended to hurt Nathan, insisting that the stabbing was an accident during the physical struggle. Detectives remained skeptical of his account, noting inconsistencies in his story. For example, Jacob initially denied bringing the knife into the fight, but Emily's statements contradicted this, asserting that Jacob had armed himself during the altercation. This contradiction further undermined Jacob's credibility. By the end of the investigation, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The evidence painted a clear picture of a volatile situation spiraling out of control. Jacob's actions, though likely impulsive, were undeniable, and the role of jealousy and unresolved emotions in driving the crime became increasingly evident. The investigation concluded with a sense of clarity, though the emotional toll on those involved, and the broader community, was immeasurable. Detective Coleman remarked that the case was a stark reminder of how fragile relationships could ignite devastating consequences when fueled by betrayal and unresolved resentment. The stage was now set for the courtroom drama that would follow, where the final judgment on Jacob Carter's fate would be determined. The investigation began with a meticulous examination of the Carter residence, now a scene of chaos and tragedy. The once pristine living room bore the marks of a violent struggle. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, and blood spattered across the floor and walls. At the center of it all lay Nathan Carter, lifeless with a single fatal wound to his chest. The knife used in the attack, found discarded nearby, became the first crucial piece of evidence. Detective Sarah Coleman, known for her methodical and no-nonsense approach, took charge of the case. Her first task was to understand the sequence of events. Emily Donovan, visibly shaken and distraught, provided a fragmented account of the confrontation. She described the escalating argument between Nathan and Jacob, the physical altercation, and the horrifying moment Jacob wielded the knife. Her words painted a picture of chaos, but they left gaps that Detective Coleman was determined to fill. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, uncovering fingerprints, blood evidence, and other physical clues. Jacob Carter's fingerprints on the knife confirmed his role in the attack, but it was the traces of his own blood that added a new layer of complexity. It appeared that Jacob had injured himself during the struggle, a detail that aligned with Emily's account of the chaotic fight. As the investigation expanded, the detectives turned their attention to Jacob's recent behavior. Phone records revealed a pattern of communication between Jacob and Emily, raising questions about the nature of their relationship. Text messages exchanged in the weeks leading up to the incident hinted at an emotional bond that had rekindled despite Emily's engagement to Nathan. While the messages stopped short of explicit confessions, they revealed a connection that could not be ignored. Neighbors provided further insights. Several reported seeing Jacob near the Carter residence in the days leading up to the crime. One neighbor recalled an argument overheard just a few days earlier, describing raised voices that hinted at mounting tension within the household. These accounts helped investigators piece together a timeline of escalating conflict, with Jacob's presence becoming an increasingly disruptive factor. Jacob Carter, taken into custody the night of the incident, offered his version of events during interrogation. He admitted to visiting the house uninvited, but maintained that he only wanted to speak with his brother. He described a confrontation that quickly spiraled out of control, blaming years of sibling rivalry and unspoken grievances for the intensity of the fight. Jacob claimed that the stabbing was an accident, a moment of blind fury that he deeply regretted. Detective Coleman listened carefully, noting inconsistencies in his story. For instance, Jacob initially denied bringing the knife into the altercation, yet the evidence suggested otherwise. Emily had told officers that Jacob grabbed the knife from the kitchen during the fight, a detail that contradicted his assertion that the weapon was never intended for use. The investigation also revealed a handwritten note found in Jacob's car. Though incomplete, the note expressed feelings of guilt and frustration. It alluded to Emily and Nathan, though it did not explicitly name them. The note added another layer to the case, suggesting that Jacob had been wrestling with complex emotions in the days leading up to the crime. Emily's role in the events came under increasing scrutiny. Friends described her as torn, struggling to reconcile her feelings for both brothers. One close friend recounted a conversation in which Emily admitted that Jacob's return had stirred emotions she thought were long buried. This revelation raised questions about whether her actions, though unintentional, had fueled the conflict between Nathan and Jacob. As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, Detective Coleman and her team reconstructed the timeline leading up to the deadly confrontation. Each piece of evidence, from the forensic details to the accounts of those involved, painted a picture of a volatile situation spiraling out of control. Jacob's actions, driven by jealousy and unresolved resentment, had culminated in a moment of irreversible violence. The investigation concluded with a clear understanding of the events but left a lingering sense of tragedy. Lives had been shattered, and a family torn apart, all because of emotions left unchecked. As the case moved toward trial, the focus shifted to ensuring justice for Nathan Carter and uncovering the full truth of what led to that fateful night. The case took a dramatic turn when new evidence emerged, shedding light on aspects of the crime that investigators had not previously considered. Just as law enforcement felt they had a firm grasp on the events leading up to Nathan Carter's murder, an unforeseen discovery forced them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. As detectives continued to analyze Jacob's phone records, they stumbled upon a message exchange that hadn't initially seemed significant. The messages were between Jacob and a third party, a close friend named Mark Reynolds. In these texts, Jacob expressed frustration and jealousy toward Nathan, stating that he felt overshadowed by his younger brother in every aspect of life. While this could have been dismissed as sibling rivalry, one message stood out. It read, "It's time Nathan learns he can't take everything from me." This cryptic message opened the door to the possibility that Jacob's actions may not have been as impulsive as initially believed. Detectives now questioned whether the confrontation was a spur-of-the-moment altercation or the culmination of premeditated intent. When questioned about the texts, Jacob appeared visibly uncomfortable, offering vague explanations that did little to clarify his intentions. Further digging revealed another shocking detail. Jacob had been in possession of a second weapon, a small pocket knife found in his car. Though it wasn't used in the crime, its presence raised unsettling questions about whether Jacob had come to the Carter residence prepared for a violent encounter. This discovery sent ripples through the investigation team, as it suggested a level of forethought that contradicted Jacob's claim of acting in the heat of the moment. As the investigation unfolded, another revelation came to light, this time involving Emily. Forensic analysis of her phone uncovered deleted messages exchanged between her and Jacob in the days leading up to the murder. In one message, she admitted she was confused about her feelings and expressed regret for how the situation had escalated. Another message from Jacob to Emily read, "You know we belong together. Nathan will never understand us." These messages cast a shadow of doubt over Emily's earlier testimony, which had portrayed her as an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire. While there was no direct evidence linking her to the crime, The messages suggested a deeper emotional entanglement that had fueled the volatile dynamics between the two brothers. The most shocking revelation, however, came from a witness who came forward weeks after the crime. A neighbor claimed to have seen Jacob standing outside the Carter residence on the night before the murder, staring at the house for an extended period. This detail, combined with Jacob's cryptic texts and possession of a second weapon, added weight to the theory that the confrontation may have been premeditated. Detectives also uncovered a voicemail left by Jacob on Emily's phone shortly before the fatal altercation. In it, Jacob's voice trembled with emotion as he pleaded for her to make a choice, and warned that things couldn't go on like this. The voicemail, raw and unsettling, provided a chilling glimpse into Jacob's state of mind and the growing tension that ultimately led to violence. As these new pieces of evidence came together, they painted a picture far more complex than initially believed. What had seemed like a spontaneous act of rage now appeared to be rooted in a toxic mix of jealousy, obsession, and a desperate desire for control. Jacob's actions were not merely a reaction to the moment, but rather the culmination of weeks, if not months, of mounting tension and unresolved emotions. The revelations also cast a harsher light on Emily's role in the tragedy. While she was not implicated in any criminal activity, her emotional entanglement with both brothers had undoubtedly played a role in escalating the situation. Friends and family began to view her as more than just an innocent victim, raising uncomfortable questions about the part she had played in fanning the flames of the brothers' rivalry. With these shocking developments, the case took on new urgency. Prosecutors prepared to argue that Jacob's actions were premeditated, pointing to the new evidence as proof of his intent. For the investigators, these revelations brought clarity but also a sense of profound sadness. The case was no longer just about a single moment of violence. It was about the devastating consequences of a tangled web of emotions left unchecked. The trial loomed on the horizon, promising to be as explosive and revealing as the investigation itself. The trial of Jacob Carter was as gripping as the investigation itself, playing out in the courtroom with the weight of justice pressing heavily on all involved. The prosecution, armed with the damning evidence gathered during the investigation, sought to prove that Jacob's actions were not the result of a momentary lapse in judgment, but a deliberate and premeditated act of violence. The defense, on the other hand, painted a picture of a man pushed to his breaking point by years of sibling rivalry and emotional turmoil. The prosecution opened by laying out the timeline of events leading up to Nathan Carter's murder. They presented the text messages Jacob had sent to both Emily and his friend Mark Reynolds, emphasizing the cryptic statement, "It's time Nathan learns he can't take everything from me." The presence of a second weapon, a pocket knife found in Jacob's car, was introduced as further evidence of premeditation. The prosecution argued that Jacob arrived at the Carter residence that night not to talk, but with the intent to confront Nathan violently. Emily Donovan's deleted messages and Jacob's voicemail to her were also brought into evidence. The prosecution asserted that these communications revealed Jacob's obsessive attachment to Emily and his growing resentment toward Nathan. The voicemail, played in the courtroom, sent a chill through the audience as Jacob's trembling voice warned Emily to make a choice and hinted at the dire consequences that would follow if she did not. Forensic experts were called to testify about the blood spatter patterns and the positioning of Nathan's body, which supported the theory of a violent struggle. The knife, with Jacob's fingerprints and traces of his own blood, was presented as the murder weapon, leaving little doubt about the physical evidence linking Jacob to the crime. The defense, however, sought to humanize Jacob and cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They described him as a man overwhelmed by unresolved family conflicts and emotional pain. They emphasized the chaotic nature of the fight, arguing that Jacob acted in self-defense during a heated altercation. The defense downplayed the significance of the text messages, framing them as expressions of frustration rather than evidence of intent. To support their case, the defense called on character witnesses who described Jacob as a loyal, if troubled, individual. They argued that his actions, while tragic, were not premeditated, but the result of a moment of uncontrollable rage. The defense also questioned Emily's role in the events leading up to the crime, subtly suggesting that her emotional entanglement with both brothers had contributed to the volatile situation. The trial reached its peak when Jacob himself took the stand. Visibly emotional, he recounted his version of the events, maintaining that he had gone to the house that night to reconcile with his brother. He admitted to losing control during the fight but denied any intent to kill Nathan. Jacob's testimony, while heartfelt, was met with skepticism by the prosecution, who pressed him on the inconsistencies in his story and the presence of the second weapon. The jury deliberated for days, weighing the evidence and the emotional testimonies. In the end, they delivered their verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. The decision acknowledged the violent nature of Jacob's actions while stopping short of labeling them as premeditated. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a punishment that reflected the severity of his crime but also left room for eventual rehabilitation. For Emily, the trial brought little solace. Her life, once filled with promise, was now marked by tragedy and loss. She remained under the scrutiny of both the public and her own conscience, her role in the events forever a source of speculation and regret. The courtroom drama, though concluded, left lasting scars on everyone involved. For the Carter family, the verdict marked the end of a chapter filled with heartbreak and betrayal. For the community of Maplewood, the case served as a somber reminder of how quickly lives can unravel when jealousy and unresolved emotions spiral out of control. The conclusion of Nathan Carter's tragic story left more questions than answers, haunting those who lived through it and those who followed it from the sidelines. The trial had delivered its verdict, but the impact of the events that unfolded on Willow Lane rippled far beyond the courtroom. Nathan's death shattered the Carter family, leaving a permanent void that no justice could fill. His parents, once proud of their two sons, now grappled with the bitter reality of one son gone forever and the other behind bars. Their grief was compounded by the lingering question: could this have been prevented if the deep-seated rift between their sons had been addressed earlier? Emily Donovan's life, too, would never be the same. Once seen as a bright and talented young woman, she now carried the weight of public judgment and private guilt. Her emotional entanglement with both Nathan and Jacob became a cautionary tale in Maplewood, fueling gossip and speculation long after the trial ended. Friends and neighbors wondered, had she unwittingly set the stage for the deadly confrontation, or was she simply caught in the crossfire of a volatile family dynamic? For Jacob Carter, the sentence of 25 years in prison meant ample time to reflect on the choices that led to that fateful night. Whether he would find redemption or remain consumed by the jealousy and resentment that drove him remained to be seen. His incarceration was both a punishment and an opportunity, one that only time would reveal if he would seize. The small town of Maplewood, once a picture of suburban tranquility, bore its own scars from the ordeal. The community, stunned by the violent unraveling of a family they thought they knew, was left grappling with the uncomfortable truth that even the most seemingly ordinary lives could harbor explosive secrets. The case became a chilling reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of letting unresolved emotions fester. As the story reached its end, one haunting question lingered. What might have happened if Jacob had never returned to Maplewood? If Emily had made different choices? If Nathan and Jacob had found a way to reconcile? The answers, like Nathan's life, were lost forever. In the quiet aftermath, Detective Sarah Coleman reflected on the case, her mind circling back to the tangled web of emotions that had driven the tragedy. "Sometimes, justice doesn't bring peace," she remarked in an interview. "It just brings answers, and even those can feel hollow." For those following the story, the lesson was clear but sobering. Jealousy, betrayal, and unresolved conflicts can destroy lives in ways no one can predict. The story of the Carter brothers was over, but the questions it raised, and the pain it left behind, would linger for years to come. And so, the house on Willow Lane remained, a silent witness to the chaos it had once contained. The broken pieces of that night were swept away, but the memory of what happened there would never truly fade, serving as both a warning and a tragedy etched into the fabric of Maplewood's history. As viewers reflect on this case, the challenge remains. How do we ensure that the unspoken tensions and unresolved rivalries in our own lives don't spiral into something far more destructive? It's a question worth considering. A silent reminder that sometimes the most dangerous confrontations start not with actions, but with emotions left unchecked.